Yay, we are back. I am officially relaunching my podcast, which, if you've been a longtime follower, you know that I made 55 different episodes, and the theme of my original podcast was Paden's Pep Talks because it was the number one thing people would say is, Paden, I call you whenever I need someone to just light me up, get me hyped on life. And I knew the very first episode that I ever made in a podcast was when I had found out that my business was going to be shuttered in COVID. And the version of me back in 2020 is an incredibly different version of the woman that I am today. And so while I had so much joy creating those pep talks, when I shifted gears into a deep healing state in my life, and put all of that in my best-selling book, Take Two, I paused the podcast because I needed time to really be present to what was unfolding in my heart and in my life. And now I'm back because it feels so good to come back in long form content. I absolutely love, if you could see me right now, I am sitting in my living room of the home that I manifested that is just amazing in so many ways. And I am looking at horses on this open field as the atmospheric river of California, February 2024, is rolling through, and I am just in such a peaceful space. So without further ado, welcome back. The entire theme that I'm dedicating this podcast rebrand to is all about being in the highest service to highly ambitious women and female entrepreneurs. I go back and forth a lot, if I'm being perfectly frank, between people wanting to help and serve anybody with a beating heart and a pulse that identifies to my way, and that I really take to heart the stories, the wisdom that I share. Without a question, they are high performing business women, whether they're entrepreneurs or they're executives or running nonprofits. They just take action in a different way. And so I'm dedicating this podcast to that demographic. And because you're my people, we're talking about people that are just really committed to your growth, and you've tied your growth to the money and the impact that you make. And not everyone has done that yet, and that's okay. We're all in progress. But if you're in this community and you're hearing this message, it's because you resonate deeply to the unique pressures of having your face be a brand, putting value out into the world in a world that is heavily critical. And there are a lot of pressures for you to perform at a certain level. And you're also somebody who knows that 80% of success of a business comes from the psychology at the top. Now, as the entrepreneur, what we also know to be true is that 80% of success is a direct reflection of your personal development. So what I like to think about is entrepreneurship really is an on-ramp or a freeway, if you will, of personal development and growth. And if you are so bold as to say, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and a female, and if you're a mother, let's stack that onto it. And if you're not, you're not choosing to work for someone else, you're working for yourself, you're in a completely different category. And our pressures are very unique. And so I want to dedicate the first episode to something that I've been really distilling in the past couple years, for sure. And that is um, the ways in which that we have as women really looked at, or at least for me, healing from religion and good girl syndrome, sort of in like one patriarchal little category over here, and modern feminism as a female entrepreneur. And so what I'd like to present today is a thought-provoking deep dive into, and then there's a million ways this could go, but what I'd like to share about is breaking down for me from a very patriarchal religious background as a white woman, how much I was conditioned to become the prototypical female from that context and the impact that that has had on me. And then how is it's affecting me as an entrepreneur? Because ultimately that's where I'm going to anchor a lot of back into is the practicality. I like getting esoteric. I like going on rabbit trails and being philosophical, but then ultimately, what does it mean to us? Because we're at the end of the day, still getting things done and still trying to create outcomes and impact in the world. So I want to talk a little bit about what I've been distilling and learning from around healing from a high religious context in the good girl syndrome that I've experienced as a result of that. And then I also want to talk about modern feminism. Now, I remain a feminist without a question. But I love the idea that feminism isn't a one size fits all. And when you are in the context of being a female entrepreneur, there are certain things that I think maybe we've picked up the banner and we're carrying forward the banner in a way that's very detrimental to our health. And so while I believe it's very important for women to be represented at all levels of influence and power, without a question, I think it is worth us looking at how do we alchemize that pressure to make it better for the next generation as female entrepreneurs without burning ourselves out and running ourselves ragged. And so that's the conversation I'm hoping we can have today. So let's talk about high religion and the patriarchy. I went through a couple years ago some anti-racism training, and I might do an entire episode on that. Probably could be more episodes than that. I know as a white woman, there is trepidation anytime we put our opinions to and our words and our energy to how we even make sense of racism as white women. And so few are acknowledged in marginalized communities as doing it with grace and with wisdom and with kindness and truth. But what I can say is that coming out of an anti-racism container in a one-on-one container with a woman that I highly admire, Jessica Dixon is an amazing coach. She really helped me to understand how entrenched religion and patriarchy are and how they benefit from the same rhetoric. And so you almost can't put patriarchy over here on one side and religion on the other and act like they're separate when there's so much that's deeply connected between the two. So whether you believe that or not, that's the lens I'm taking here. And so when I look at the impacts of growing up as a pastor's kid of an evangelical background, sometimes Baptist, but I think my family would say we're more evangelical. I look at like fundamentalism, which if you, what's the name of that episode or the series on Netflix that was so freaky because I knew people who I grew up with that were being interviewed in it. It was about the Duggar family. I'll probably remember it as soon as I stop talking in however many minutes that is. But there was a Netflix series that I actually had childhood friends interviewed for, and it was about the detrimental impact of Christian fundamentalism in their life. Now, I wasn't that extreme, though, of course, I did run in circles that were crossover. I was more on the evangelical side. But essentially what I would describe that is the way in which religion was taught to me and indoctrinated and conditioned around me was to the depth in which you couldn't exist as an identity outside of your Christian identity being first. Like I might even say like you being a Christian was like 85% of your personality and 15% was something else. That's at least the way I experienced it. And the impact of that was profound. And so I want to just break down good girl syndrome. If you follow me on TikTok, I have done so much work on or shared a ton of videos as I've been processing this. I have freebie and free guides if you're wanting to deep dive on it around good girl syndrome, how to parent my daughter who already is displaying signs of good girl syndrome, which is just horrifying as a mother, right? But also being compassionate to myself is that I am reparenting myself and healing myself in real time and I'm responsible to guide and nurture a beautiful little girl who is going to come into a world that treats women differently and in harmful ways. And so, real quick breakdown, I just want to talk about religion and the patriarchy conditioning good girl behavior. What does that look like? So, for example, it's submissiveness. So, teaching women that men are in charge, that they are destined by God to be the ones that are the leaders. And that is highly problematic for female entrepreneurs. Like, as we're listening to this, like, you might be getting triggered as I'm getting triggered telling you about this, because we are fully breaking that mold if we step out in leadership in any way in the business world, in any way, even in our own families. And so, but I'm just going to speak about the business world. And so the way that I was raised is that I have this vivid memory of sitting in church, and my mom is a very spiritual woman. And 1000% my intuitive lineage comes through the mother's line. And she is very intuitive and very spiritual. And she adds another to it. Also, without throwing anyone under the bus or being hypercritical, without intention, I believe I was parentified as a child, and it caused me to keep parts of my childhood, and I was made more responsible than I needed to be. But when I looked at women under the Christian context, essentially they got to be leaders of children and maybe leaders of themselves, but they were never allowed to be over or appear in a spiritual context to men. I found that highly problematic. And then going back to that memory I alluded to, is I remember sitting in church. My dad wasn't the pastor of this church. But I remember sitting there and them asking, who wants to come up and pray? And my mom moved forward as if she was going to come up to like standing open mics, and she was going to come up to speak. And as the speaker watched her inch forward with her body language as if to stand up, he quickly went to the microphone and said, "Just the men, please." And I watched her sit back and her kind of shoulders slump. And I just had such a profound realization that religion and patriarchy does not make space for female leaders. Period. End of statement, as far as I'm concerned. And the way that women are viewed, the role that they're viewed, is they're there to produce additional lives, and they are there to be subservient and supporters of the men in their lives. And everything is geared around the man realizing his purpose, potential, and passion, but it is assumed that a woman's purpose and passion will just be her children. That's the first point, you guys. This might be way too lengthy of a first episode to go into all of this, but that was just, I think a huge part of me rejected Christianity as it's taught in the modern framework or in those very conservative environments in that moment. Like, I just didn't see a place for me to shine. Even I remember my dad had created a quiz or some way to like identify your spiritual gifts. And there's things like being graceful, being merciful, being this, being that. And like, I just remember having teaching and leadership be my two spiritual gifts. And I remember looking at that as a kid being like, well, that kind of sucks. I guess I have the gifts of, that would be freaking cool if I was a man, but as a woman, I'm highly limited to how I can be influential in that way. And so it just never landed well for me. The second thing that patriarchy and religion puts on top of the women that are buying into their mindset is modesty. I remember I was a youth group leader in college for a non-denominational church, and they did a talk on female modesty. The topic, of course, was modesty, but men weren't being talked to. It was women, and it wasn't women telling other women to be modest. It was men telling women to be modest. And I remember going to the youth pastor at the time going, don't you think a female should be giving this talk if you're just going to talk to females? And he said, no, because the boys are in the room and they're 13 and 14 years old. And even though you're 19, you can't really be speaking over them. And I just remember being like, are you kidding me? Like, what? So that's another way that it shows up, is that women have to be modest in dress and behavior, suggesting that women's bodies are sexualized and our sexuality should be regulated and controlled. And if anyone's tempted by us, it's not their fault, it's our fault. It's wild how this infiltrates us. It also, I think, dramatically affects how a woman is seen as small. I remember in college taking a class on interpersonal communication and how women physically take up less space on or in brainstorming. Women will tend to fold their arms, fold their kind of put their knees up, and men will branch out, like legs spread, arms taking up space, and just the real estate taken up by men versus women is marked. The third way that religion and good girl syndrome or religion and patriarchy put women down is around self-sacrifice. So women are grossly, I mean that word, it is gross how much women are praised for losing their self-identity, as if that is a virtue. They call it self-sacrifice or being selfless to make it seem awesome. But essentially, I love the word selfless so much for this, because you are losing yourself. You are selfless, without a self. And we have valorized self-sacrifice and endless giving as if it's the virtue, as we also simultaneously watch women deplete, burn out, and live super sad, repressed lives. And also sacrifice their ambition, because you could kiss that goodbye if you're going to be in that context. The fourth area that I found that religion and patriarchy really hold women down is around silence and politeness, encouraging women to be quiet. I didn't feel like I actually experienced too much of that growing up. I definitely felt like I was encouraged to speak, but I wasn't allowed to speak over men. At least this is more in like the church context where I was seeking to be in leadership. But we're also discouraged from expressing anything we might be seen as a negative emotion. Like, it's highly surprising and a big turnoff to most people when they see women being angry. And a lot of times when I even work with clients, or even I work with employees of mine that are women, you won't catch them ever using the word anger. They use frustration. I'm not angry. I'm just irritated. I'm just agitated. I'm slightly annoyed. I'm a little frustrated. Like, the amount of effort and energy that goes into not using the word anger to clearly describe a nuance of the core emotion of anger shows the amount of emotional labor that women have to go through just to get in touch with their feelings. And this is also encouraged, like, do not be angry, even if you've been mistreated. The other is perfectionism, sort of this instilled belief that women must strive for perfection in all areas. And so often it's like the Proverbs 31 woman. You're going to be an amazing homemaker. You're going to have it all together. You're going to be industrious and bringing revenue into the family. And you're going to be doing all these different things and be this highly moral, high-standing woman. How freaking exhausting. I remember reading Proverbs 31 in my teenage years going, my gosh, I mean, she sounds freaking cool, but she sounds miserable, like tired, exhausted. It just didn't sound super exciting for me. We also are taught a lot around dependency. So that's sort of the sixth area that I would highlight here with religion and patriarchy, is you're seen as women should be financially dependent on, and even emotionally dependent sometimes on, male figures, highly undermining our sense of independence. And as female entrepreneurs, we've moved ourselves away from that. But for those of us that are female entrepreneurs that were raised in with that type of modeling and traditional gender roles, behind the scenes, we might experience a lot of guilt and shame around not being good enough as a wife, good enough as a homemaker, and on top of it all, comparing ourselves to Martha Stewart or Joanna Gaines or whoever we consider to be good in those areas when they've made entire careers and they're paid to be good in those areas, right? Finally, we also have, well, not finally, two more points. Purity. So women as being pure, idolizing our pleasure as being for someone else, major shaming women around any self-pleasure practices as if that is horrific and Jezebel energy. And then also like saving ourselves, and we can't be tainted for who? Not for us, for men. And there's a lot of shame around women's sexuality and autonomy. And I think this massively affects female entrepreneurs, specifically around creativity. Sexual energy and creative energy are very much the same. And the first time I heard that, I thought that was kind of a gross concept and weird, but I do believe it's true. We are like the same energy of orgasming is the same energy of creating a beautiful, innovative, powerful, explosive, and awesome idea into the world. And so the fact that we have had guilt and shame around feeling pleasure in our bodies disassociates us from our bodies. And a woman's body carries her intuition, carries her wisdom. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I just had this happen to me this week where I was on a call with someone and we were interviewing them for something and my stomach twisted and I got goosebumps. Not the cool goosebumps like when a good Taylor Swift song comes on, but like goosebumps as in I am getting a major ick and I would wash, if I was shaking this person's hand, I would want to wash my hands after. Like my body's giving me those signals. And the meaning that I made from my body's signals allowed me to realize, oh, something's going on with this person and they are not the right fit for this role in this company. Done. But purity culture absolutely disassociates a woman from her body, from her intuition, and shames her in owning the wisdom of her body, the pleasure in her body, and it does us a massive disservice. The last point I want to make here is around service orientation. So this is pushing women towards roles and careers focused on nurturing others, serving others, being secretaries for others, being virtual assistants for others. And I'm not trying to like shame anybody who's created amazing businesses around that, because a need's a need and the world has a lot of needs that we can go and fill. But why limit us? And I think that's the main piece. And so we can sometimes even feel like even though we could pick any major we want in the world, when we roll into an engineering room and we're on a college tour and we see no females, but you roll into liberal arts and you see at least 75% women, you're going, okay, where am I going to feel the most fun, the most safe, the most supported? And we end up as a culture kind of shifting women into these more limited roles. And I believe that's a direct impact of patriarchy and religion. So good girl syndrome. I've done a ton around this, but essentially it's around us putting a ton of pressure on ourselves to be perfect, a ton of pressure on ourselves to be the prototypical female, to do it all, to do it with a smile, to have no negative feelings, to suppress sexuality, to suppress independence, to be subservient and to create dependencies on people around us. So it very much breeds a codependency, definitely breeds people pleasing. Like the more, and even I hate the word people pleasing, slight rant here. I think it's self-betrayal, period. And it should be called self-betrayal because it doesn't sound good and it's not good. To betray yourself in service of someone else's happiness as if you're valuing their happiness over yours isn't a good long-term strategy unless you're in a high control patriarchal environment, at which point you might as well be the Saint Mary. You could get sainthood alone for good girl syndrome and codependency and people pleasing in those environments. So a lot of healing that I have done around this goes to self-care. I actually will do a lot of episodes on this coming up around self-care really being a portal for abundance. The amount of resistance that we as women feel around the radical idea of taking a couple hours a day to take care of ourselves should be a giant red flag. One of the biggest ways that I've repatterned this is by putting my needs as a priority in my calendar every day and not missing a day. And the amount of healing that I've done around chronic patterns of self-betrayal has allowed me to return to a much truer, much happier, and much more content version of myself, which has translated into creating an entire new business, literally. So reinventing myself, even as a professional, because I'm no longer chasing accolades and other external measures of success to prove that I've got some value here in the world. So now I want to shift into modern feminism, because coming out of a high religious context, without a question, I said, there's a lot of fuck you energy when you realize that that what you have been spoon-fed your entire life is exactly what's keeping you small, exactly what's making you afraid to succeed, what makes you shrink from the spaces in your soul you were designed to command. There's anger there. Anger's not wrong. I want to be really clear. It's healthy anger to feel like you have been conditioned away from your power, away from your purpose. And to also be generous to say it's not one person's fault or two people's fault or my parents' fault, but it's an entire system that is designed for this. And so what I very much did was to pendulum into kind of modern feminism. And I was deconstructing my religion before I even had children. So it's probably been about 8 to 9 years I've been deconstructing religion in my life. While now being even more spiritual than I was before, which is just such the perfect little full circle if there ever was one. But I want to talk a little bit about modern feminism, because what felt really attractive and sexy to me, I think you'll relate to as a female entrepreneur, which is modern feminism is the sexy alternative, which is I can be a superwoman. I can succeed in a high power career. I can be the perfect mother. I can manage the entire family's social calendar, and I can do it all. I can be the financial wizard in the family, and I can be the artist and the dancer and be super sexy and be really fun and have an entire army of killer, amazing, high powered females who cheer me on. And yes, first of all, yes, I think we want that. But there's a dark side to that, which is sometimes what I see happening for women is as we're aspiring to all of that, we're just stacking more responsibilities, more, I want to almost say obligations on top of ourselves, to the point where we're just running a human experiment on how much can one woman handle before she cracks, before she breaks. And I remember in 2020, when I face planted in the middle of the day from chronic stress in front of my 2 children. And I remember blacking out completely, looking up and not knowing where I was, and having my daughter go, "Mom, what's wrong? What's wrong, Mom?" And my son, who was nonverbal at the time, just crawling over to me and hugging me. And I couldn't even lift my arms to hug him back. And I had such a freak out, because at 34 years old, that is not when you would assume your body would render you on the floor, unable to move your limbs. And to me, I look at that as there's a woman who got hindered by patriarchy and religion and felt squished and snuffed out. And so she came back like a roaring flame and was ready to take on the world, and was missing some critical pieces. And so all I ended up doing was breaking myself. And I think modern feminism runs a risk of doing that without coming from a place of healing, without integrating spiritual codes of success, like magnetizing success instead of chasing success, understanding that your energy and your intention supercharges the results that you're going to get in your business. So many of these things that go against conventional wisdom when it comes to the business world. I also think modern feminism creates professional pressures. So we talk about these glass ceilings that in every field, and women are highly competitive, and we go into these male-dominated environments, but we don't have adequate support. We don't have adequate recognition, and we certainly don't have adequate mentorship. And so it's not feminists' fault, right? Or feminism's fault. It's just we are running a race, loading it like, oh, I want to say, I'm just saying like the Oregon Trail. It's like we're loading up the Oregon Trail like wagon, and we think we're racehorses, but we're loaded down with a lot of the shit that we're carrying from our generational trauma, from our own lived trauma, from our own suppression, from our own anger about that suppression, from all of that. Like, we're weighted down with it. We're not healing that. And then our body's in a survival state where we're still running on adrenaline, high anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, whatever. Like, we're just running straight into it. And somehow we're being cheered for as if we're these valiant Olympians going out there. We're going to break ceilings for all these women while we've got just this shit show of weight behind us and on us that we have not dealt with. We're not setting ourselves up for success, and it has a lot of issues. We also treat self-care like tasks instead of honoring ourselves and our limitations. And understanding our limitations can feel like a four-letter word to a lot of female entrepreneurs. We don't want to be having limitations. We don't want to plan for our limitations. So in not planning for our limitations, we just face plant our way into our limitations. We burn out, we implode, we explode on the people that we love. And then we're angry at ourselves and beating ourselves up as if it's our fault. There's so much love and compassion that I have in my heart for female entrepreneurs out there embracing the modern woman and trying to repattern and heal and be compassionate and do self-care, but it's exhausting. And then we're comparing against each other. And that's where modern feminism, I don't even know if it's feminism's fault, but it's just what's happening for females trying to be empowered, is we are comparing ourselves against each other's highlight reels. And you've heard this before. This is not new information. But one of the most radical shifts I ever made was, I unfollowed anyone I felt was fake, which you can unfollow literally anyone at any time who you feel is fake, or not even judging them, because I'd love to have a world free of females judging females, but just an account that isn't bringing up for you a lot of positive emotions. So make it about us, not about them. And the freedom that I felt when I unfollowed everybody, pretty much, even my good friends, I went through a period where I was like, I'm just curious how social media would shift for me if I wasn't seeing everybody's vacations, seeing everyone's fancy clothes, them like showing only the best parts of their life, which, yes, are always worth celebrating. And I think social media can be a place to celebrate, but not to the point where we've really lost a sense of realness and authenticity. And the comparison culture is hard. It's hard to look at that and feel like you can win. And so much of us are copying one another on social media. A huge reason actually why I unfollowed so many people was because I didn't want to sit there and go, oh, she said it better. Boy, that was such a freaking creative post. My gosh. Oh man, she looked way better than me. Her outfit is so curated. I have nothing in my closet that looks like that. So I shouldn't be putting my face out there. I might as well just go on Canva and do a meme. Oh wait, there's so-and-so, and she's talking about she's never met a relaxed woman, and I've got 7 people sending me her post. And now I feel like I've got nothing to say on self-care because she said it, which is so untrue, but this is what we end up doing. And then a sense of activism. And I think that this is where modern feminism is tricky, because there is a sense that we feel like we've been, we honor the women that have gone before us for sure. And if it was like a relay race, because I used to run relays for like the 1 year I was in track and field, don't be too impressed, in 7th grade. And I remember racing and having to catch the baton from someone else and then carry it forward on your team. And I think there's a deep sense with millennial women specifically, where we feel this immense pressure that we've been handed this baton, where there's a sense from older generations that, hey, we fought the good fight. We broke the freaking ceilings. You all better make good with it. You all better go and do big shit with your life because of our sacrifices. So then on top of the Oregon Trail wagon behind us and all the pressure and us pretending to be these thoroughbred Olympian horses out here running this crazy race, which is like the visual analogy that I have, we now are expected to be the strongest ones, which is just insane. Of course, we're not going to be the strongest ones. We're also the generation with pocket therapists. No other generation has had 17 reasons why you're fucking your child up at age 13 months old in the palm of their hand, beeping at them and telling them that they will fuck their children up for life if they don't do these 17 things correctly in the right tone of voice and getting your husband in line with it, right? Like, it's insane. Activism sometimes I think can be something that we feel like, gosh, we have to stand for more, do more, and be fierce, which also means that a lot of us don't acknowledge that it's hard. A lot of us fake like we're fine and we're not. A lot of us act strong and we front with this facade of female empowerment, and we're secretly wishing we could drive our car off the freaking road because it would feel so liberating to just fly. True story. I did do that. I didn't do it, but I thought that at one point, and I had this like major moment of, wow. I had just come back from a training with a Fortune 500 company and it went so well. But on the drive home, so a career highlight for me at that time in my 20s, I'm ready to drive. I'm thinking about driving off the road and it feels exciting for me. Really, really problematic. And I don't think there's enough female entrepreneurs out there honoring the fact that what we're doing is hard and it feels like an Olympian athletic event. And we still need to recover. We still need to train. We still need to take breaks. And we're not doing any of that. We're not honoring the rhythms in our lives and slowing down because we're still believing that if you slow down, you're weak or you're wrong for doing that. And that's not true at all. So what I want to share is, if you are vibing with this, and you come from and not all of you will, but if you come from a highly conservative environment and you are view yourself as a feminist, you are in a lot of shit right now, I guess is what I want to say, like in as lighthearted a way as possible. There is a lot that's going on. And there's a lot of things that make it hard for us to step in our power and be healing and deconstructing the patriarchy and the ways in which we were taught to be the prototypical female, and not try to be so superhuman, running on just hustle and grind with no other ways of slowing down and giving our ourselves a breath. And if you find yourself on and copy or do the audio book, because I did the audio for that, but it's really important, I believe, for all of us to pause and to realize that slowing down is not for the weak. Recovery is for the athletes. And yes, I run a fitness facility, so this is a very good analogy for me. But if you know Tom Brady, he's like the #1 most celebrated quarterback of all time. He spends more time in recovery than he does in performance. And he performs at the top, highest level in his sport in his 40s, which is just unheard of. And it is no different for entrepreneurs. One of the scariest things I've ever had to do was to say, I'm taking 2 hours a day for self-care. And I was able to sort through in those 2 hours what I was carrying that wasn't mine and offload that. What I was carrying that was ingrained in me, whether with intention or not, that has harmed me, and repatterning that. I think so much gets worked out when we just make space, because if there's one thing you get out of listening to this podcast, I sure hope it's you are your own guru. You are your own healer. The wisdom that you are seeking for to break through to your next level of your business, to be able to understand how to navigate, to succeed in the ways that you uniquely are here to succeed, are inside of you. The strategy, the business plan, the aligned action, the highest, most important breakthrough things you're going to do are locked inside of you. And if you don't spend time getting real with you and finding who you really are and getting anchored and grounded in that version of you, those will go secretly hidden away. And you will constantly feel like you're hitting your head up against a wall and frustrated because you're not getting the breakthrough that you know is yours. And if you're listening to this podcast right now, I know it's because you know at your core, you are here to do some big shit. And the very thing that's so powerful in you, that seed of knowing that you are here to create impact, not just wealth, impact, that you are here to create, to model for other generations that women can do big fucking cool things differently than men, differently than other generations, differently than other women. Being yourself, you can get paid to be you. That's a whole new thing for our generation. If your frustration and feeling stuck literally points to the fact that you know there's more and you know there's breakthrough coming and you're ready for it and you're wanting it and you want it now. And if you're serious about getting there, I am going to preach all day long. You do the freaking opposite that everyone says, and you go inward and you stop outsourcing genius elsewhere. And I know that's a lot coming from a coach who people pay to help them integrate this. But the one thing that even as a coach, I will never bypass is your sovereignty and not even answering questions that clients will have that make me center my opinion into their world as if it's going to be true. I think that mining your own magic is where the magic is, not trying to get someone else to speak over you chronically and to the point where you don't even trust yourself. So I'm curious how this episode is landing for you. I'm curious if you come from a similar background as me, if you identify with pieces of modern feminism, but you also see how it's creating a problem for women, and if you have explored self-care. I'm really curious if you've gone into that place and what has been hard about it. Something that I want to create, and I at some point will prioritize it, is a journal for women to document and to ease into prioritizing themselves in a profound and ritualistic way. And so if you have comments or thoughts on that, please let me know. I will create entire episodes about those. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to journeying together as we really dive into how women will succeed, and we talk about the intersectionality of business and spirituality because it is so juicy, especially for females.